Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the last seminar in POMP core seminar series this semester. I have a really great honor to introduce our two very distinguished speakers. Adam Szostkiewicz is Polish author, commentator on religion and politics, journalist and translator. He studied Polish language and literature in the early 70s at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow. He was active in the democratic opposition and the Solidarity movement. He was imprisoned during martial law in Poland, and after his release, he remained part of the Solidarity underground. In 1988, Adam Szostkiewicz joined Tygodnik Powszechny, a liberal Catholic weekly in Krakow, as political editor. He was the spokesman for the 1990 presidential campaign of Polish Prime Minister Tadeusz Mazowiecki. I should also mention that in the early 1990s, Adam Szostkiewicz was a producer in the BBC Polish section. In 1999, he joined the staff of Polityka weekly newsmagazine in Warsaw, where he writes about the Roman Catholic Church in Poland and worldwide and other religions in the wider context of culture, society, as well as on international relations and literature. Last year, President Bronisław Komorowski awarded Adam Szostkiewicz the Officer's Cross of the Order of Polonia Restituta for outstanding achievements in the democratic transformation of Poland, as well as for his contribution to the development of free media and independent journalism. And Adam Szostkiewicz's discussant today is going to be Jonathan Luxmoore, who has been Europe correspondent in Oxford and Warsaw for Catholic News Service, Ecumenical News International, and the Tablet since 1988, as well as a staff commentator for Polish radio and freelance writer for newspapers and news agencies in Europe and the US. Jonathan's coverage of religious affairs during the transition to democracy in Eastern Europe won 5 Catholic Press Association awards and the Silver Award for WordFest Houston for a TV film, A Time to Build. I should also mention that Jonathan Luxmoore is a member of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, Chatham House, and a number of other networks and organizations. He authored The Vatican and the Red Flag, Rethinking Christendom, and his 2-volume study on communist-era religious persecution will be published this summer. So we have really 2 profound experts on Polish Catholicism here in the ESC. Without further ado, Adam Szostkiewicz.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for inviting me to this, and thank you for coming. Last time I was talking about Christianity in this place, I mean in Oxford, that was more than 20 years ago. There was a conference on Christianity after communism at, I think, New Manchester College. And when I was talking to the participants, I was at that time, I must say, very optimistic about the future of both Christianity throughout Europe and the Polish Roman Catholic Church. But that was 20 years ago. Now I must say I am not that optimistic, both about Christianity, the future of Christianity, especially in Europe, but also I'm not that optimistic about the future of the Roman Catholic Church as an institution of political and social influence in my country, as well as I'm not that optimistic about the future of what I would call an organized Catholicism in Poland, by which I mean the media, the church as an institution, of course, and the lay Catholic activists. the main topic of my reflections here is Poland and Catholicism as part of Polish national identity, especially in the 25 years of our Polish experience of democracy, of freedom, of, well, some kind of multicultural society emerging in a Europe of open borders. So let be it. There was an unattributed saying, very popular, still, I think, being remembered in Poland, unattributed saying that it is only under the cross alone, that Poland is Poland, and it is only under this sign, the sign of cross, a Pole is a Pole. This is, I think, a good introduction to what I'm going to talk about, because we have here at least two elements. The first one is that, of course, Christianity in Roman Catholic version is the most important part of Polishness. Secondly, there is an implication that if you do not feel a Catholic, you can't feel a Pole. So it is very significant, sort of a declaration or self-definition or self-description of us Poles and of us Catholics. And of course, there are very good, sound and strong reasons for that, for this equation, shall I say, equation between the Catholic religion, the Catholic faith, and Polishness. Let me sort of visualize this with you in a very brief way. This, of course, is a scene from Stocznia Gdańska, while on strike, the historic strikes of 1980 to be sure, with all of them Polish workers, the products in a way, or at least there was the intention like this by the government, to be representatives of the new society and the new men, socialist men, of course, all of them kneeling on their knees to pray, all of them waiting for their turn to go and confess. And by the way, the priest is quite a significant figure in the recent Polish political as well as national history, Father Jankowski, who is now deceased. Another example. Well, who takes the risk? Where is it? What is it?
Pope's visit?
It is the so-called pielgrzymka męska, male pilgrimage, or pilgrimage for males at Piekary Śląskie, one of the most important sanctuaries of Polish Catholicism. You see, sea of heads, all generations, all walks of life, everything. Then again, as well as, this is also Piekary, and how very symbolic it is. The miners, in their very formal, very official attires, wearing, of course, and carrying the cross with them, the Polish Catholic cross, and this boy in a cap with the Polish emblem, the Polish white eagle on the red background. Then again, another, shall I say, symbolic scene. That's the Holy Father, John Paul II, praying at the grave of Father Jerzy Popiełuszko, who was one of the martyrs, Catholic martyrs in Poland under communist rule, was killed on an order by a high-ranking security official, by the four security service functionaries, in a brutal way, I must say. He was just killed and drowned in a river. Behind the grave, very heavy stone, so heavy that all of us attending the funeral, I was part of it, we could feel how heavy the fate, the national fate, the national destination of our country may be for us all. Not only for Father Popiełuszko, a martyr. Behind the grave there are, of course, banners, at that time completely illegal, with the logo, the world-famous Solidarność logo. And, of course, thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, I must say, attending the funeral, coming from every place in Poland to celebrate this. That was, of course, one other huge blow to the communist authorities at that moment. A free gathering of so many people coming to say goodbye to one of the national Polish heroes at that time, and a martyr. All of this shows, to my mind, what I'm talking about. How very closely related the Catholic religion, the Catholic imagery, and the Catholic emotions, how very close they can be related to a feeling, a sense, a definition of Polish national identity. And maybe one more on this. Again, take a guess, please. What is this? This is, I understand, sort of Polish studies. So that's why yes, I dare to ask questions like this. So it is, of course, the moment after the death of John Paul II, April 2005. Almost every major place, major city in Poland, whether the people were or were not religious, whether they would go or would not go to church, on this very day, all of them were sort of, in a very spontaneous way, trying to be together and to light this for the memory of the Polish Pope. Now, to me, I think it is quite natural, quite obvious to think about the Catholic religion as a part of Polish national identity. And the very sign of the cross, the Polish saying that I was quoted, that I began with, was in Polish: tylko pod krzyżem, tylko pod tym znakiem Polska jest Polską, a Polak Polakiem. And still, after all those years, all changes. That's more or less what almost everyone in my country would understand immediately. Whether he or she has some kind of issues with this, that's another matter. But the very formula like this, it is something that Tom, Dick, and Harry in Poland would immediately grab, understand, and more or less applaud. But the meaning of the cross is more than that. The meaning of the cross in Christian religion, of which Roman Catholicism is just a part, is much, much wider and richer than an expression of national identity. With due respect to this, the meaning of the church is much, much greater. And that's one of the problems we may have as a community, I suppose, with this saying, with this imagery, with this beautiful, of course, beautiful scenes, very emotional to us, but still expressing what exactly expressing? That's the big question as far as I can say. So, there is no time here, I think, to discuss how the Polishness, whatever it meant or still means, was changing over the years in different political, historical epochs in Polish history. No time for this. But anyway, I would say, yeah, that's true, still true. Catholicism, Catholic religion, confession, however we call it, is still a pillar, one of the pillars of our Polish identity. Problem is that we tend not to explore in a more detailed way what exactly it means. What exactly it means that it is only under the cross alone that Polishness is so alive and so integral to our national identity. Talking about history, maybe it is not necessary to remind you to the public like you that, as a matter of fact, it was more or less in the middle of the 17th century that this junction, this Jungtim between Polishness and the Catholic faith was defined rather expressively for the very first time. It was, of course, the wars with the Swedes, Lutheran Swedes, and the Russian Orthodox, and King Kazimir, Król Kazimierz, taking vows at Częstochowa Holy Shrine of Black Madonna, one of the holiest Polish Catholic religious imagery icons, taking vows that she is the Holy Mother, she is now to be crowned as the Queen of Poland. My God, if you have a Mother of God, the Holy Mary, as the queen of your nation, your country. That's quite impressive. And that's what happened, 1655, I think. Professor Davies was writing about this in a very instructive way to us Polish Catholics, showing the importance of this historical moment. During the unfreedom time, a very difficult, painful experience that we had, the 19th century, when in the end of the 18th century we lost our national sovereignty and independence for more than 120 years. To be honest, it's 123. And again, under partitions, the religious factor was very important, and of course it was to mobilize the Polish people in defense of their national identity. The situation was sort of provoking because it was only the Habsburgs, the Austrians, who were co-patriots with us religiously as Catholics. But the Prussians, especially after Bismarck, the dominant factor for them was, of course, not Catholic religion, quite the contrary. He waged some kind of a war, the Kulturkampf, against Catholics. Now, the Russians, what the Russians are, in these terms, almost everyone knows and sees again now in these days. So, again, this expression, this idea of Catholicism as an integral part of Polish national identity resonated very, very well with the society. Well, not exactly with the whole of the society, because we are now talking about the 19th century, and of course the society, it was not exactly all of them who spoke Polish. Still, it was taking roots deeper and deeper in the hearts and in the minds of the Polish society, even the lower classes, the lower echelons, because the context was also religious. And as you, of course, know very well, one of the most popular way of defining an identity, national identity, is in a negative way. Like, we are not them, we are us. We are not Orthodox, we are not Lutherans, we are Catholics. So it played very well. But on the other hand, there is a price for this. Obviously, it was a great thing to feel Polish and to consider oneself as a good, loyal son or daughter of the Roman Catholic Church. Sounds nice. Problem is that even then, in the 19th century, and especially in the beginnings of the 20th century, and with the Polish reborn in 1918, not all of us living on the Polish soil were religiously Catholic, but still they were Polish. They speak Polish. They feel Polish somehow. Problem is, of course, very simple, in a way, simple. That the identification of Polishness with Catholicism and vice versa may tend to antagonize people living in the very same Polish society who happen not to be Catholics, not to be ethnically Polish, but still feel themselves part of the society, part of the community, civic community. After 1945, with the communists coming to power, the pattern still held. The pattern identifying Polishness with Roman Catholic religion and all institutions of Catholicism. The pattern held and was, of course, very, very useful, helpful in the struggles for independence, for democracy, whatever. Like in the previous images, that was communist-run Poland, all those images. Indeed, there was no rival to the Catholic Church as an institution and to the popular Catholicism in serving the society as a sort of a bulwark against the authoritarian rule that was imposed on Poland after 1945. And it was also a bulwark, very helpful sometimes, but not always, against this utopian myth, socialist myth of creating the new man and the new society. Still, it was very handy as a narrative. Now it is a very popular word. A narrative that almost everyone in Poland would understand immediately. That we continue to be under some kind of oppression, and we continue to have some kind of solace and some kind of defense, mainly in the Roman Catholic Church and in the Catholic faith. There was no genuine Polish Poland, let's say, but we had some kind of substitutes. That was our perception. That was the perception of my generation, Solidarity generation. The perception was that we have a substitute for a state, a sovereign state in the Roman Catholic Church as an institution. And almost everyone would understand that, of course, who is the head? Who is the leader of the nation? The Primate Wyszynski, because he is just the interrex. Almost everyone in Poland would immediately understand this. Interrex, of course, not the first secretary of the Communist Party, but still there is a price for this. If that is like this, you somehow give up some kind of independent analysis of what really happens if without any sort of pacta conventa, let's say it let's call it, without any sort of pacta conventa, acknowledge the Roman Catholic Church as a sort of a state, a national state, and the leaders of the Roman Catholic Church as the leaders of nations. There is a price for this. So it was, of course, very useful, helpful in our struggles with the communist rule, but there was some kind of aftermath that we still have to struggle with, at least in my opinion. What happened during the crucial years of 1980s was something that was absolutely unexpected. An alliance was formed between part of the liberal, secular-minded Polish intelligentsia, including young people, young students, and the priests, and the church, and the Catholic activists. I was sort of a witness to all this happening. That was something unprecedented. Whatever we say today about this, that there was no problem at all for believers and non-believers to meet, to talk, to discuss, and to act together against the same enemy, which was, of course, the authoritarian state. I call it the golden era of Polish Catholicism. These very years, beginning more or less in the mid-70s, ending with the roundtable negotiations and the transformation, a peaceful transformation. And the church again, after all the hesitations, because there were, of course, very serious hesitations on the part of the institutional church, decided to support the idea of having a negotiated regime change from an authoritarian one to a democratic one. The church as an institution decided to support it. And I think that was a great moment, a great decision, which helped to regain the country. Was it under the cross only? In a way it was. But the very important point here is that at that time, even the leaders of the church as an institution would not scan the people with whom they were working together for the benefit of the country. They would not scan them. They would not make any sort of lustratia. Who is this? What was important was the common cause, and the common cause was to lead Poland into a peaceful transformation, which happened, like in Spain, more or less, with the same, more or less, role of the church institution. In both Poland and Spain, after hesitations, both churches decided to side with the society and to leave the state, the power. That was the essence of the change, I think. Very important for us, very important for the Spanish. Now, would all of this had happened had it not been for solidarity, and this alliance, this unprecedented alliance between all people of good will working for the common cause? My answer is no, it would not. It would not have happened. This alliance was a very important part of it. And in maybe my final remarks, well, so far so good, one would say. If there is such a beautiful, inspiring story, narration of Polish Catholicism being an integral part of Polish national identity, if that is so fine, if that is so good, why we have so many problems now, today, with the church, with the Catholic organized opinion, Catholic lay activists, and the politicians cynically or not cynically using the church, the religion, and the very cross in their own political fights, infights. Why is it? How it happened? My answer is more or less, of course, there are many reasons for this. This is not a one reason sort of a phenomenon. A mixture of many reasons made it possible. But one of the most important things to me is a cultural passivity in first of all in the very church. And all of us Catholics who were ready to help to build this new Poland of our dreams, a democratic, liberal, open, pro-Europe Poland. What happened was that the easiest way, the leaders of the church and of lay Catholic opinion decided, the easiest way was to return somehow to the patterns, cultural, political patterns of the yesteryear, which was, first of all, the Endecka story, the language, the rhetoric, the emotions of late 30s. That was the easiest way. And that's how it happened. Far more a challenge, far more a bigger challenge would be to confront the new realities, unprecedented realities of a liberal, open Poland in an open Europe. To confront those realities, new realities, with a new narration, a new history, a new story to be told to the Poles about the church, its place in a democratic system, about the uses and abuses of the cross as a sign, a religious sign, first of all, and then a national sign. But it did not happen. For many reasons, they decided not to try to work on a new story to be told, on the role of the church, on the role of religion in a new, open, democratic society, in an open Europe. Quite the contrary. What we developed, I say we because I feel part of the Catholic society in my country. Well, my emotions are certainly cultural emotions are Catholic, but my conscience, shall I say, is liberal, and I'm trying to reconcile somehow the two. I think Catholicism is a big thing, a great thing, for us, at least. I respect this tradition, I respect this faith, I respect the institution of the Church for the role it played, that I mentioned, in previous years, in very, very difficult years. I also admire many Catholic figures, most of them are dead now, and there is, I'm afraid, no one to replace those big figures of Polish Catholic life, of Polish Catholic thinking. That's part of me. I was for 11 years an editor with Tygodnik Powszechny, which was one of the few centers of more or less independent thinking, not only about things religious, but also about things political and social. That was where I was taught what Catholicism is, by people who are, by people like Father Tischner, Father Musiał, the editor-in-chief, Mr. Jerzy Turowicz, and many other people like this. So it was not like there was nothing to use in this new democratic, open Poland, because part of their legacy was, of course, this kind of commitment by the Catholics to the cause of democracy, independence, human rights. But it was ignored. There was much of black PR, public relations, on the right-wing side, crushing this, blocking this way, so that it was never used again. Which I find a very big problem, not for me, not even for the Church, but for the whole of Poland as a modern society in a modern world. One of the lifelines, shall I say, were cut like this. What was happening with the empty space? Because the space was emptied by the right wing, so that the ideas of the so-called open church, open Catholicism, were no longer relevant. That was their propaganda efforts. It is a failure, and stop thinking about this in a new Poland that we live now. We know we don't use it, we don't need it. That was the kind of message they were sending to the society. And they began to be quite powerful. They developed their own media and everything, and they were supported by the politicians, the right-wing politicians, quite a powerful party and quite a powerful segment in the society. And the result is that the place was taken by what I would call an Polish-American version of cultural war, which is like things like, of course, massive demonstrations, sometimes for, of course, very, very noble cause, like the defense of life, for example. That's one of them, by the way. kids are cool, dzieci są super. But again, the dominant narration, the dominant message now in mainstream Catholic media, in mainstream Catholic lay opinion is something like that. What we need is, of course, much of the vigor of the third world church, which, by the way, is quite an important, quite, shall I say, unusual thing to invite a preacher from Africa to give, to arrange, to lead, shall I say, to lead a massive, massive gathering of people for religious celebration, with high-ranking bishops participating in all this, in a society that, on the other hand, was not very happy to have any sort of aliens amongst us. That's important, and it's good in that sense that now a black preacher is seen to be one of the leaders, in a way, of Polish church. But isn't that a paradox? Well, it is, in a way it is. But of course things change. Another expression is, of course, that's the scenes after the crash of the presidential plane at Smolensk, 2010. Again, there is a cross, we call it Krzyż Smoleński, and the people of all sorts of walk, gathering around the cross. Sometimes they show a clear readiness to link that very crash to the Katyn massacre. That's another cross, Brzozowy Krzyż, which is a symbol of the Katyn massacre. So, in the minds of Poles, in this very difficult, very emotional moment, there was again a very simple thing to happen, like, well, that's a continuation. That's us Poles being again mortified, sort of, attacked by them, Russians. Another expression of this dominant mainstream Polish popular Catholicism is, of course, a scene like this: Christ to be crowned as the King of Poland. Because we have Mary, the Holy Mary, as the Queen, why don't we have the Christ as the King? And there are people, many people, working on this. Also, by way of organizing such parades for the intronizacja Chrystusa Króla in Poland. This is not 10 years ago, this is not 100 years ago, this is today. In such a situation, that's another example of the church. One of the most prominent figures in the popular Catholicism today is Father Rydzyk, who is politically right-wing and who is a media mogul, having still a very powerful influence on the minds of a large segment of the Polish society, with one of the leaders of the right wing. Is it okay? Well, we'll see. We'll see the final result. But I think there is a problem in all this. This is a political religion, not necessarily a Catholic faith, but also a political religion. Now, in today's Poland, in today's mainstream Catholic media, for example, scenes like that are not very welcome. This is the Pope, the Polish Pope, an icon, a mentor, a leader of the nation. But what happens is that we gradually, in our narration, are losing important parts of the narration, as far as I can say. Like this Pope was, of course, about Polish national identity. This Pope was, of course, about the Catholic religion being still a very powerful force in Polish life and working for good causes. But this very Pope could also meet with the Dalai Lama, giving a signal to the Poles as well, like, this is another world, this is an open world, this is a multicultural, multi-religious world. Why don't we are in some kind of dialogue with all this? It is useful, it is interesting, let's do it. Today, you'll not find pictures like this in the Polish Catholic media of mainstream. Quite the contrary, what you find with, of course, Benedict XVI, to me, sometimes it is like, in a way, the former Pope, Ratzinger, is much more valued than Pope Francis. Of course, that goes without saying, but also in some areas than Pope Wojtyła, which I find a very saddening, very sad sort of evolution. Finally, what is the evolution? The evolution is from the golden era that I mentioned, where this alliance was possible and there were hopes that proved wrong. Hopes for a continuation in a new Poland, of this kind of alliance, in the sense of cooperation for the common good on the most important national issues. That has not realized. That was substituted somehow by this evolution that I call a Polish variant of Polish cultural war with the modern world, with everything that is in the modern world that the church and the mainstream Catholic media would find now destructive and un-Polish, of course, very dangerous to the very existence of Poland, and so on and so forth. So, of course, to me, there is still a role to be played by religion in all this, not only in Poland, even in Europe. I mean Christianity, because religion, there is not only one religion in Europe. Well, I'm talking about Christianity. But what kind of Christianity? What kind of religion? I would ask myself, and I would strongly recommend that this kind of discussion continues in Poland, of tribal loyalties, of suspicion toward toward religions in the plural, towards non-believers, or maybe the religion of some trust, some willingness to understand the others as they think, what they believe, the religion of some kind of self-limitation and cooperation. That's the options. Which one do we choose? Which one Poland will choose? Which one Polish church will choose? A political religion or a religion of charity? Let's use this very Christian word of charity, caritas, which transcends political, social dimensions. In other words, in a very simple formula, do we need a religion of peacemakers, a religion of the 8 Beatitudes from the mountain, or a religion of cultural warriors fighting the modern world, fighting the liberal idea and the liberal society? To my generation, it is sometimes very, very shocking that liberalism, the liberal ideas, seem to be perceived as the leaders of today's Polish Catholicism as more dangerous to the Polish identity, to the Polish perception of ourselves than communism was. To me, it is a surprise. I'm very disappointed with this. Now, what I'm going to say, what I was trying to say is that, of course, Catholicism is still a part of our national identity, and that's good. The question is, what kind of Catholicism? What kind of religion? What kind of church? Ecclesia semper reformanta, we say. Of course, the church needs a restoration. And that is what happened. After 89, the church was restored in the material sense, in social sense, in political position. Question is if restoration is the same as a renewal. And my answer is, I don't know, but for the time being, I don't think so. For the time being, I don't think so, that this Polish Catholicism as it is, restored, agree, but renewed? Not necessarily. What I'm talking about is quite the contrary, an evolution in the past. Looking for the past rather than for the future. The last line maybe is a quotation again. It is from the very first non-communist, as we would say in Poland, Prime Minister Tadeusz Mazowiecki, one of the important persons of this open church, open Catholicism. And he said, of course, Mazowiecki, he himself said, of course we respect the church. We do. And we respect it always as a sign of denial, as a sign of refutation of what is wrong with the world as it is. We respect this because that's in the essence of Christianity. We cannot call ourselves Christians without acknowledging that there is a role like this for the church in this world as well. But is it the only role? Refusal? Denial? No, it's not. To complete the picture is another function of the cross. The cross is a sign of unity. The cross as a sign of cooperation, of making people doing good things together. So, we respect it, said Mr. Mazowiecki, but we don't agree, he continued, that the sign, the cross, is also the sign of coercion, compulsion, enforced agreement, ignoring the free will, the free conscience of the free people in a free world. That's the whole lesson. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jonathan.
Thank you. Follow that. I've hugely admired Adam's work over the years from the time I lived in Poland, and I'm very, very pleased to be speaking alongside him. I'm honoured to do so. Just a quick note about myself. When I started, and do shut me up incidentally if I respond to too many of the points. I'll just try and raise a few sort of bullet points. When I, in the first year in which I was working as a journalist in Poland full-time, I remember distinctly there were 785 accredited foreign correspondents in the country. That was 1989. 10 years later, there were a total of 38, of whom I was one, and all the others had long since upped and gone because their editors had reassigned them because there wasn't enough interesting news coming out of Poland to merit having correspondence there. I was one of very, very few, possibly the only foreign correspondent who specialised in religious news, and I'd never lacked work on a single day, and I still don't. So I'm very grateful to the Polish Church for keeping me in business. I don't only write about the Polish Church. I'd go mad if I did that. I write about the Church generally. But having said that, in the course of the last 30 years, I reckon I've published about 5,000 newspaper articles about the Polish Church of varying lengths. But I still frequently think I'm not even sure really what's happening with the church or about the church at any one time. So this will just be a sort of stab that I'm making. Adam talked at the beginning about his lack of optimism. So what I'll try to do is maybe inject a note of sort of cautious optimism instead, and just respond to some of the points that he's made just on the hoof. I think I wouldn't argue with any of what he'd said about this, the role of the sign of the cross as a bond of Polish national identity. I think the way this works now is it is changing its expression in very significant ways. It's still a bond of tribe which reasserts itself at certain moments, and Adam mentioned these key moments. The death of the Pope was quite unprecedented actually in modern times for the great sort of masses of people that it brought out onto the streets, but that wasn't in any way a sort of typical expression of Polish national identity. I think it was an exceptional moment. I think Adam talked about the price to be paid for this, the expression he used. My sense is that Poland is still sorting out its the position of its national minorities. The national minorities are sort of finding their way in the new Poland. The most important thing is that there is no legal discrimination, no constitutional discrimination. There is no compulsion or coercion involving non-Catholics. I think it's important to say that. Patterns of influence, patterns of public opinion is sort of steered in various directions, but there is no discrimination, at least that I'm aware of. Adam talked about the golden era of Polish Catholicism. I would certainly agree with that. I'd say specifically under martial law, that was the golden age of the Polish Church, at least in modern times, when you had this exceptional sort of coming together of people. I don't think the word alliance is the right word to use in this case. I don't think there was an alliance between the church and the democratic opposition or opposition groups. I think it was much more in the categories of a meeting of minds, certain common aims, which were just there at the moment for obvious reasons. And I think why this is important is that I think a lot of the people who discovered the church in the 70s and 80s during this exceptional time, and they saw the church as a vehicle for their of opposition, as a vehicle of cultural expression, of social togetherness. People who were perhaps not, who had come to the church from the beginning, had a rather idealized view of the church because they encountered the church through the medium of these very genial priests like Father Tishner in Krakow, Jacek Sali in Warsaw, who's a close friend of mine, and particular parishes that provided a forum for opposition groups. I mean, sometimes on a very lavish scale. I think people like this tended to have a rather idealized picture of the church. When communist rule collapsed and the church began to sort of reimpose its structure and its discipline on its members, there was this disappointment that set in, and a lot of people turned their backs on the church because of it. As regards the what Adam called the so many problems which surround the church today, it seems to me that there was to some extent a return to the cultural and political patterns of the past. I wouldn't go as far as to say it was a sort of rebirth of the Endetsia from the late 1930s or anything quite of that kind. I think it was a very modern version of that at the very least. But to some extent, yes, a return to previous patterns in which previous ways in which the church had functioned, and it also seemed to me that there were certain dangers that the church hadn't learned lessons from its past as well. It was in danger of generating the same kind of opposition, which the Communist Party had used in the 1930s and 1940s against it. So there were some dangers. That in a way the church would kind of create its own sort of opposition. The strength of anti-clerical feeling in Poland, which surfaces on the internet, for example, is much stronger and more acerbic than you would see in this country, for example. And this is in a Catholic country where there's a very strong and acerbic undercurrent of anti-church feeling. Having said that, it seems to me that after 1989, the Catholic Church had its vision of the kind of Poland that it wanted to see emerging, and it was quite entitled to have that vision, as did other groups, as did political parties, ideological groups of various kinds. So the Church was entitled to work for its vision, to implement it. The use of phrases like open Catholicism or an open church, the Catholic Church doesn't like those expressions because they carry sort of vague connotations.
I'm not the Catholic Church.
No. I'm not. I should add that I'm actually not a Roman Catholic myself, so I'm completely free to say whatever I like. I've never felt any sort of restriction in what I can say and write about the church. But you also use expressions they and we, which I'm a little bit uneasy about. Who are they and who are we? I think it's a much more nuanced and sort of variegated picture that we have in the church. But just it's slightly sort of chaotic, I'm afraid, my response is. But it seems to me that again, I said I'd try to inject a note of optimism. It seems to me that the church did have its vision of the kind of Poland it wanted to see. It was prepared to work pretty hard to sort of push that vision through, and using whatever forms of influence it had. And I think it was legitimate that the church should do so. If it was a big institution that had a lot of influence, that had ways of shaping public opinion, it was entitled to do that. You use words like coercion and compulsion. I don't think the church has the means of coercion and compulsion available to it. It has an influence. It has certainly not in any legal or constitutional sense does the church have the means to compel or to coerce. there are other points I could make. I mean, I think the attitudes to Pope Benedict versus Pope Francis, I don't think that's correctly portrayed, but I mean that's obviously a matter of opinion. And most importantly, concerning the question of, I think you used the expression, a cultural war against the modern world. I think that's way over the top. Certainly, the point about restoration versus renewal, it's an interesting opinion, but I wouldn't see it in quite such dark and pessimistic colours. And then finally, as regards the kind of Christianity which is going to be best for Poland, best for Europe as well, for that matter, that's of course a matter of opinion. A political religion versus a religion of charity, of course, everybody would agree with that. But I think, coming back to my note of optimism, I think what we're seeing in Poland is a natural process. The Church has, for historical reasons, thought very much on a kind of macro scale. It thinks big is beautiful. It sort of loves these huge statistics and big gatherings, and this is regarded as a sign of the vitality of Polish Catholicism. I think that the lesson is gradually setting in that actually you have to think beyond quantity and think more in terms of quality, because that in the end is what is going to win your arguments and enable you to push your vision through. The Church has also been, its narrative, another word you used, has been very much in terms of sort of the kind of heroic language of the past, the big sort of collective forms of identity. I think gradually that is beginning to break down, just under the pressure of sort of changing circumstances. As regards allowing a degree of pluralism in the Church, what a Christian would say is that the role of the Church is to bring people to God. There are as many ways to God as there are people, so that is the basis for pluralism in the Church. Nobody can be compelled to think or to believe anything that they don't want to, so the Church doesn't have the means to do that. It only has an influence, it only has ways of persuading. So I think what we're seeing is simply a period of adjustment, which maybe has gone on a bit longer than one might have liked to see. But I don't think don't think the overall picture is anything like as pessimistic as you portray it. So that's about all I can say at this point.
Okay. The floor is open for questions.